The elegant facade of Lumiere restaurant stood proudly against the Manhattan skyline, its golden lights casting a warm glow onto the busy street below. Inside, the atmosphere buzzed with the gentle murmur of conversations and the subtle clink of fine china. Crystal chandeliers cast intricate patterns across the mahogany-paneled walls, while the aroma of exotic spices and perfectly seared meats wafted through the air. Sarah Mitchell stood before the floor-length mirror in the staff room, adjusting, her crisp white uniform for the 10th time. Her hands trembled slightly as she smoothed down her sleek blonde hair, pulled back into a perfect bun. At 24, fresh out of hospitality school with honors, she had finally landed her dream job at one of New York's most prestigious restaurants. Tonight was her first shift, and she was determined to prove herself worthy of the position. "Remember," she whispered to her reflection, "you belong here." The words echoed her mother's constant encouragement throughout her challenging years at school, where she had worked multiple jobs to afford her education. Sarah's determination had always been her strongest asset, though sometimes it manifested as an overzealous desire to prove herself. The restaurant's reputation had soared even higher in the past 6 months since its acquisition by a mysterious Middle Eastern investor. Rumors circulated about the new owner's identity, but few had ever seen him. Sarah had heard whispers among the staff about his occasional visits, always unannounced and incognito. "Ready for your first night?" Marcus, the maître d', appeared behind her. His perfectly pressed suit and commanding presence embodied everything Sarah aspired to be in the hospitality industry. "Remember, every guest who walks through those doors deserves to be treated like royalty. That's what sets Lumiere apart." Sarah nodded confidently. "I've studied the menu backwards and forwards, memorized wine pairings, and researched our regular clientele. I won't let you down." As she stepped into the main dining room, Sarah took in the sophisticated ambiance. The space had been thoughtfully designed to create an intimate atmosphere despite its grand scale. Each table was its own island of privacy, separated by clever architectural elements and strategic lighting. The clientele matched the setting perfectly. Business moguls, celebrities, and socialites occupied most tables, their expensive attire and jewelry catching the light. Among the serving staff, Sarah noticed a young man she hadn't met during training. He moved with quiet efficiency between tables, his dark features and slight accent suggesting Middle Eastern origins. Hassan, she recalled from the staff roster, had joined the team recently as well. The evening began smoothly, Sarah's section filled with exactly the kind of guests she had anticipated: a famous actress, a group of investment bankers, and what appeared to be a retired diplomat and his wife. She executed each interaction flawlessly, her training and natural charm earning appreciative nods. Then he walked in, an older man in a casual sweater and worn jeans, his salt and pepper, beard slightly unkempt. He chose to seat himself in Sarah's section, at one of the best tables in the house, one usually reserved for VIP guests. Sarah felt her confidence waver. This wasn't the type of client Lumiere typically attracted, and she had worked too hard to let her section's sophisticated atmosphere be compromised. Approaching the table, Sarah plastered on her most professional smile, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Good evening, sir. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at our bar. The main dining room requires reservations, and we're quite fully booked this evening." Her tone was polite but carried an unmistakable hint of dismissal. The man looked up at her with kind eyes that crinkled at the corners. "Actually, I'd prefer to dine here if possible." His accent was slight but distinctive, his voice carrying a gentle authority that Sarah chose to ignore. Hassan, who had been passing nearby with an empty tray, stopped abruptly. His eyes widened with recognition, and he nearly dropped his tray. Sarah noticed his reaction, but attributed it to surprise at her handling of the situation. Surely he would agree that maintaining the restaurant's standards was paramount. "Sir," Sarah continued, her voice taking on a more condescending tone, "Lumiere is known for its exclusive dining experience. Our clientele expects a certain atmosphere." She glanced meaningfully at his casual attire. "The bar offers the same menu in a more relaxed setting." The man's expression remained unchanged, but something shifted in his eyes. Not anger, but something more complex. Hassan had now moved closer, his face a mask of quiet panic. The tension in the air grew thick enough to cut with one of Lumiere's expensive steak knives. Hassan stepped forward, his voice quiet but urgent. "Miss Mitchell, perhaps I could have a word with you." His usual calm demeanor had given way to barely concealed anxiety. Sarah shot him an annoyed glance. She didn't need assistance handling this situation. "I'm in the middle of something, Hassan," she replied curtly, turning back to the seated man. "Sir, I really must insist. You have a beautiful restaurant here," the man interrupted softly, his eyes taking in the ornate surroundings. "The crystal chandeliers remind me of my grandmother's palace in Dubai, though she always said it wasn't the crystals that made a home welcoming, but the warmth with which we receive our guests." Sarah faltered for a moment, caught off guard by the mention of a palace. Hassan seized the opportunity to step closer, speaking in rapid, hushed tones. "Miss Mitchell, this is Sheikh Ahmad Al-Rashid. He's the owner of Lumiere." The color drained from Sarah's face as the implications of Hassan's words sank in. The Sheikh, the mysterious owner who had transformed Lumiere into an even more prestigious establishment, was sitting before her in casual clothes, having just been subjected to her condescending treatment. I, Sarah stammered, her carefully constructed professional facade crumbling. The Sheikh raised a hand gently, stopping her apology before it could begin. "Please sit with me for a moment," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. It wasn't a request she could refuse. Hassan quietly disappeared, though Sarah noticed him hovering nearby, ready to intervene if needed. "Do you know why I bought this restaurant?" Sheikh Ahmad asked once Sarah had taken her seat, her hands trembling slightly in her lap. When she shook her head, he continued, "I was traveling through Europe years ago, before my business success. I was young, dressed, much like I am now, and many fine establishments turned me away based on appearances alone." He paused, taking in the elegant dining room with appreciation. "Then I found a small restaurant in Paris. The owner, an elderly woman, welcomed me as if I were family. She said something I never forgot. 'In my restaurant, we serve dreams with every meal, and dreams don't care what clothes you wear.'" Sarah felt tears threatening to form in her eyes, but she held them back. The Sheikh's voice remained gentle, but his words carried weight. "That woman taught me that true luxury isn't about exclusivity. It's about making everyone feel extraordinary. When I learned Lumiere was for sale, I saw an opportunity to create that same magic here in New York." "I'm so sorry," Sarah finally managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was trying so hard to prove myself, to show that I belonged here, that I completely missed the point of hospitality." Sheikh Ahmad smiled warmly. "We all learn our most valuable lessons from our mistakes, Miss Mitchell. The question is, what will you do with this lesson?" Before Sarah could respond, a commotion arose from a nearby table. A regular customer, known for his demanding nature, was berating another server over the temperature of his wine. Sarah watched as the server, young and inexperienced like herself, struggled to maintain composure. Without thinking, Sarah stood up. "Please excuse me," she said to the Sheikh, who nodded with interest. She approached the troubled table, her recent humbling experience giving her a new perspective on handling difficult situations. "Sir," she addressed the angry customer with genuine warmth, "I apologize for any disappointment with your wine service. Would you allow me to personally select another bottle from our cellar? I know of a particular vintage that I believe would perfectly complement your meal." The customer, surprised by her sincere approach, relaxed slightly. Sarah's genuine desire to enhance his dining experience, rather than simply appease him, shifted the entire dynamic of the interaction. From his table, Sheikh Ahmad watched the scene unfold with approval. Hassan approached the Sheikh's table, quietly. "She learns quickly," he observed in Arabic. The Sheikh nodded, a thoughtful expression on his face as he watched Sarah skillfully turn a potentially negative situation into a positive dining experience. "Sometimes," Sheikh Ahmad replied, "the most promising seeds are those that require the most careful nurturing." He pulled out his phone and began typing a message to his restaurant manager. It was time to implement some changes at Lumiere, and he had just found the perfect catalyst for transformation. The following morning, Sarah arrived early for the Staff meeting, her stomach in knots. Word of her interaction with Sheikh Ahmad had spread quickly among the staff, and she could feel their curious glances as she took a seat in the back of the room. To her surprise, Hassan slid into the chair next to her, offering a sympathetic smile. "You handled yourself well last night," he said quietly, "after the initial misunderstanding." His gentle tone held no judgment, which somehow made Sarah feel even more embarrassed about her behavior. Before she could respond, Marcus called the meeting to order. "Good morning, everyone. We have some exciting changes coming to Lumiere." He paused, building anticipation. Sheikh Ahmad has decided to implement a new training program focusing on inclusive hospitality. He believes we can elevate our service while making our restaurant more welcoming to all guests. Sarah felt her cheeks burn as several staff members glanced her way, but Marcus wasn't finished. Sarah Mitchell and Hassan Rahman will be working together to help develop this program, bringing fresh perspectives to our traditional approach. The announcement sent a ripple of murmurs through the room. Sarah sat frozen in her chair, unable to process what she'd just heard. She, who had thoroughly embarrassed herself just hours ago, was being given this responsibility. After the meeting, Hassan caught up with her in the corridor. "The Sheikh sees potential in people," he said, as if reading her thoughts. "In my country we have a saying, the date palm, with roots in the fire, still bears sweet fruit." Sarah listened as Hassan shared his own story for the first time. He had come to America 3 years ago, leaving behind a successful restaurant in Baghdad. "War changed everything," he said softly. "I arrived here with nothing but my experience and determination. Many places wouldn't even consider hiring me despite my background. Then I heard about Sheikh Ahmad and Lumiere." His words struck a chord with Sarah. She thought about her own struggles, working multiple jobs to put herself through school, feeling constantly judged by her classmates from wealthy families. "I guess I became what I once resented," she admitted. "I was so focused on proving I belonged in this world of luxury that I forgot what it feels like to be on the outside." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Sophia Chen, Lumiere's celebrated head chef. "The Sheikh has requested a special meeting with both of you," she announced, her usually stern expression softened by curiosity. "He wants to discuss ideas for a new menu that celebrates diversity and inclusion." In the private dining room, Sheikh Ahmad was already waiting, dressed in traditional Arabic attire that transformed his presence entirely. Yet his warm smile remained the same as the previous night. The table before him was laden with dishes Sarah didn't recognize. Traditional Middle Eastern delicacies alongside fusion creations. "Food has the power to bridge cultures," he began, gesturing for them to sit. "Each dish tells a story, carries memories, creates connections. I want Lumiere to be more than a fine dining establishment. I want it to be a place where stories meet." As they sampled the dishes, the Sheikh shared his vision for the restaurant's transformation. The new training program would go beyond standard service protocols to include cultural education, empathy training, and personal development. The menu would expand to incorporate dishes that reflected New York's diverse population, while maintaining Lumiere's high standards. "Hassan, your experience in Baghdad will be invaluable in training our staff about Middle Eastern hospitality traditions," Sheikh Ahmad said. "And Sarah, your recent experience gives you a unique perspective on how preconceptions can blind us to human connections." Sarah looked up from a particularly delicious piece of baklava. "But why trust me with this? After how I behaved?" "Because," the Sheikh replied, "you showed something essential in how you handled that difficult customer last night, the capacity to learn and adapt. More importantly, you demonstrated genuine care for someone else's experience, even in the midst of your own crisis." The meeting lasted hours, evolving into a deep discussion about hospitality, culture, and human connection. By the end, Sarah felt a transformation beginning within her. The shame of her initial mistake was being replaced by determination to create something meaningful from the experience. As she left the restaurant that evening, Sarah paused to watch the sunset paint the Manhattan skyline in shades of gold and purple. A quote from her hospitality textbook suddenly came back to her. "Luxury is not in gold-plated cutlery, but in golden moments shared." For the first time, she truly understood what that meant. The following weeks at Lumiere brought sweeping changes that transformed both the restaurant and its staff. Sarah and Hassan worked tirelessly to develop the new training program, spending countless hours researching cultural traditions and innovative hospitality approaches. Their different backgrounds and experiences created a dynamic partnership that produced unexpected insights. One afternoon, while reviewing their progress in the empty restaurant, Sarah noticed Hassan seemed distracted. "Is everything okay?" she asked, setting aside her notebook. Hassan hesitated before responding. "I received a letter from my sister in Baghdad. She's finally received her visa to come to America." His joy was evident, but Sarah sensed an underlying concern. "She's a talented chef, but she's worried about finding work here just as I was." Sarah felt an idea forming. "Have you spoken to Sheikh Ahmed about her, with all the changes happening at Lumiere?" Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Charlotte Blackwood, a renowned food critic known for her scathing reviews and particular disdain for fusion cuisine. Her unexpected appearance sent the staff into a controlled panic. Sarah watched as Marcus smoothly led her to the best table in the house, while Sophia quickly appeared from the kitchen to oversee every detail personally. "She's here to review our new menu," Hassan whispered, his expression tense. The restaurant had recently introduced several dishes that blended traditional Middle Eastern flavors with contemporary American cuisine. Exactly the kind of fusion Charlotte Blackwood loved to criticize. Sarah took a deep breath and approached the critics' table. Instead of feeling intimidated, she found herself genuinely excited to share the stories behind their new dishes. "Ms. Blackwood, welcome to Lumiere. May I tell you about tonight's special? It's a dish that tells an incredible story of cultural connection." Charlotte raised an eyebrow, her pen poised over her notepad, but as Sarah began describing how the dish was inspired by a chance meeting between Sheikh Ahmad and a Parisian restaurateur years ago, the critic's expression softened slightly. Sarah wove the tale of hospitality and human connection, explaining how each element of the dish represented a different aspect of the story. Throughout the evening, Sarah and Hassan tag-teamed the service, each adding their own perspective to the dining experience. Hassan shared memories of similar dishes from his childhood in Baghdad, while Sarah explained how working on the new menu had transformed her understanding of luxury dining. As Charlotte finished her dessert, an innovative fusion of Middle Eastern baklava and French crème brûlée, Sheikh Ahmad made an unexpected appearance in the dining room. He approached her table not as the owner of a prestigious restaurant, but as a fellow food lover, eager to discuss the evolution of cuisine. Their conversation, which the entire staff strained to overhear, ranged from the role of food in cultural diplomacy to the importance of preserving traditional cooking methods while embracing innovation. Charlotte's usual sharp demeanor mellowed as she and the sheikh discovered a shared passion for using food to break down cultural barriers. Later that night, as the staff gathered for their closing meeting, Marcus shared some unexpected news. "The sheikh has an announcement," he said, gesturing to their employer who had joined them in his traditional dress. "Hassan," Sheikh Ahmad began, "your sister's resume is impressive. We would be honored to have her join our kitchen team when she arrives." Hassan's eyes widened in surprise and gratitude. "And Sarah," the sheikh continued, "I'd like you to develop a formal cultural education program for our staff, something we can eventually share with other restaurants in our group." The meeting ended on a high note, but Sarah lingered behind, watching the staff disperse. She thought about how much had changed in just a few weeks, not just in the restaurant's operations, but in her own perspective. The elegant dining room no longer felt like a stage where she had to prove herself, but rather a space where genuine connections could flourish. "Penny, for your thoughts?" Hassan's voice broke through her reverie. He was cleaning the last of the tables, his movements precise and graceful. "I was just thinking about that first night," Sarah replied, moving to help him. "How differently things might have turned out if you hadn't recognized the sheikh." Hassan smiled. "Perhaps it happened exactly as it needed to. In my culture, we believe that sometimes the universe puts obstacles in our path not to block us, but to change our direction." As they finished closing the restaurant, the lights of Manhattan twinkled beyond the windows like stars. Sarah realized that luxury wasn't about exclusivity or pretense. It was about creating moments of genuine connection, about making every person who walked through their doors feel like they were exactly where they belonged. The autumn sun cast long shadows through Lumiere's windows as Sarah arranged fresh flowers for the evening service. Charlotte Blackwood's glowing review had been published that morning, praising not just the innovative menu, but the restaurant's revolutionary approach to inclusive luxury. The article had already generated a flood of reservation requests from a more diverse clientele than ever before. "Your section is going to be quite interesting tonight," Marcus commented, approaching with a stack of reservation cards. "We have everyone from a Silicon Valley CEO to a retired schoolteacher celebrating her 80th birthday." His eyes twinkled. "The perfect opportunity to put your new training program to the test." Sarah smiled confidently. The past month had transformed her understanding of true hospitality. She and Hassan had worked tirelessly to develop a comprehensive cultural awareness program, which was now being implemented across the restaurant. Even veteran staff members were discovering new ways to connect with guests. The kitchen doors swung open, and Sophia emerged with Hassan's sister, Amira, who had started her trial period as a sous chef the previous week. The two women were deep in conversation about a new dish they were developing, Amira's traditional Iraqi techniques, bringing unexpected depth to Sophia's French classical training. "Sarah," Amira called out, her face glowing with excitement. "You must try this." She hurried over with a small plate of what looked like a miniature work of art. "It's a fusion of Sophia's coq au vin with my grandmother's Iraqi spice blend. Hassan said you'd appreciate the symbolism." As Sarah savored the complex flavors, she realized how much her palate had expanded along with her perspective. A month ago, she might have been skeptical of such a bold combination. Now she understood that innovation often came from unexpected connections. The evening service began smoothly, but Sarah soon faced a challenging situation. The Silicon Valley CEO, clearly used to preferential treatment, became visibly annoyed when he noticed more attention being paid to the elderly schoolteacher's birthday celebration at the next table. "I don't think you understand who I am," he said coldly when Sarah approached his table. "I dine at establishments like this all over the world, and I expect a certain level of priority." Sarah took a deep breath, remembering Sheikh Ahmad's words about true luxury. "Sir, at Lumiere, every guest is our highest priority. Would you allow me to share something special with you?" Without waiting for his response, she gestured to Amira, who emerged from the kitchen with a surprise appetizer, a sophisticated take on street food she remembered from Baghdad. "This dish tells a story," Sarah began, her voice warm and engaging. "It reminds us that extraordinary experiences can come from the most unexpected places." As she described the humble origins of the dish and its elevation to fine dining, she watched the CEO's expression shift from annoyance to intrigue. By the end of the evening, the CEO and the schoolteacher were sharing stories across their tables, brought together by the universal language of exceptional food and genuine hospitality. Sarah caught Hassan's eye across the room, and they shared a knowing smile. This was exactly the kind of transformation they had hoped to create. After closing, Sheikh Ahmad called an impromptu staff meeting. The restaurant's atmosphere had changed noticeably since implementing the new training program. The traditionally rigid hierarchy had softened, replaced by a collaborative spirit that enhanced, rather than diminished, the establishment's elegance. "I have been visiting restaurants around the world," the Sheikh announced, "looking for others who share our vision. Tonight, I am pleased to tell you that Lumiere will become the flagship location for a new global initiative." He paused, his eyes scanning the eager faces before him. "We will be hosting representatives from some of the world's finest restaurants next month for a symposium on inclusive luxury dining." The announcement sent a ripple of excitement through the staff, but Sarah felt a flutter of anxiety. This would put their program under intense scrutiny from the international fine dining community. Hassan, sensing her concern, quietly moved to stand beside her. "Remember," he whispered, "the greatest pressure creates the finest diamonds." His unwavering confidence in their vision helped steady her nerves. As the meeting concluded, Sarah noticed Amira deep in conversation with Sophia, their hands moving animatedly as they discussed potential menu items for the symposium. The scene perfectly embodied everything they had been working toward: barriers breaking down, cultures blending, creating something greater than the sum of its parts. Walking home that night, Sarah passed the spot where she used to stand during her breaks from her previous waitressing jobs, dreaming of working at a place like Lumiere. She had achieved that dream, but in a way she never could have imagined. The true luxury wasn't in the crystal chandeliers or premium ingredients. It was in the genuine connections being forged every night within those walls. The weeks leading up to the international symposium transformed Lumiere into a hub of frenetic activity. Sarah and Hassan found themselves working double shifts, fine-tuning their training program, while helping Sophia and Amira perfect their groundbreaking menu. The pressure was immense, but there was an electric energy in the air that energized everyone. One evening, as Sarah was reviewing the symposium schedule in the empty dining room, she noticed Hassan sitting alone at a corner table, staring at his phone with a troubled expression. She had come to know her colleague well enough to recognize when something was wrong. "Hassan," she approached quietly. "What is it?" He looked up, his usual composed demeanor slightly shaken. "My old restaurant in Baghdad. It's struggling. The family running it now, they're having trouble adapting to changes in the city." He paused, running a hand through his hair. "They were like family to me, Sarah. I feel responsible." Before Sarah could respond, Sheikh Ahmad's voice came from behind them. "Perhaps this is an opportunity, not a problem." They turned to find him standing there, his casual attire contrasting with his thoughtful expression. "The symposium isn't just about sharing our success. It's about creating a network of support." The sheikh pulled up a chair, and soon they were deep in conversation about ways to help Hassan's former restaurant. As they talked, Sarah noticed something subtle but significant. The sheikh wasn't merely offering solutions. He was asking questions, encouraging them to develop their own ideas. "What if," Sarah suggested, growing excited, "we use the symposium to launch a mentorship program? Established restaurants helping others adapt and grow, sharing resources and knowledge." The idea had come to her suddenly, inspired by her own journey from judgment to understanding. The sheikh's eyes lit up. "And Hassan's former restaurant could be our first partner." He turned to Hassan. "Would you be willing to return to Baghdad for a short time to help implement the program?" Hassan's expression was a mix of emotion. Yes, of course. But what about our work here?" "I believe Sarah is ready to take on more responsibility," the sheikh replied, giving her an appraising look. "Perhaps it's time to promote her to training director." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Amira, carrying a tray of experimental dishes for them to taste. The fusion of Iraqi and French cuisine had evolved into something extraordinary under her collaboration with Sophia. Each dish told a story of cultural exchange and mutual respect. As they sampled the food, Sarah's mind was racing with possibilities. The symposium could be more than just a showcase. It could be the beginning of a movement. She thought about her own transformation from someone who judged based on appearances to someone who understood the deeper meaning of hospitality. The next morning, Sarah arrived early to find an unexpected visitor in the restaurant: her mother. Diana Mitchell had taken 3 buses from New Jersey to surprise her daughter, having read Charlotte Blackwood's review. Sarah felt a surge of emotion as she watched her mother take in the elegant surroundings. "I'm so proud of you, sweetheart," Diana said, her eyes glistening. "But not just because you're working in this beautiful place. I'm proud of who you've become." Sarah gave her mother a tour, introducing her to the staff and showing her the kitchen where Amira and Sophia were already preparing for the day. Diana, a retired nurse who had raised Sarah alone, was treated like a visiting dignitary by everyone she met. "Your daughter is helping us create something very special here," Sheikh Ahmad said, having appeared quietly during the tour. He was dressed in his full traditional attire, preparing for a meeting with potential investors in the mentorship program. Diana smiled warmly. She always had a big heart. Sometimes she just needed reminding to let it show. She turned to Sarah. "Remember what I always told you? Strength isn't in proving you're better than others. It's in helping others become better alongside you. The words struck Sarah deeply, especially now as they prepared for the symposium. She realized that what they were creating at Lumiere wasn't just about fine dining or cultural fusion. It was about showing the world that true luxury could be inclusive without losing its magic. Later that evening, as the restaurant filled with its usual diverse mix of guests, Sarah watched Hassan teaching a new server the art of reading guests' unspoken needs. The server, initially nervous about working in such a prestigious restaurant, was blossoming under Hassan's gentle guidance. In the kitchen, Amira was showing Sophia a traditional technique for working with phyllo dough, while Sophia shared her secrets for the perfect sauce reduction. Their laughter floated out into the dining room, a testament to how far they'd all come. Sarah touched the new name badge that identified her as training director, feeling its weight of responsibility. The symposium was approaching rapidly, but she no longer felt anxious. They had something precious to share with the world, something that transcended cultural boundaries and social status. The morning of the symposium's opening day, Sarah stood in Lumiere's dining room, watching the first rays of sunrise filter through the windows. In just a few hours, the restaurant would welcome some of the most influential figures in global fine dining. The tables had been rearranged to create intimate discussion spaces, each setting perfected to the smallest detail. Couldn't sleep. Either? Amira's voice broke through her thoughts. The chef was already in her whites, her hijab perfectly arranged beneath her toque. The past weeks had seen her confidence bloom as her innovative dishes gained recognition. I've been up since 3, adjusting the spice blends for today's menu. Sarah smiled, remembering how far they'd both come. Remember when you first arrived? You were so worried about fitting into a French kitchen. And now I'm teaching Sophia how to properly bloom saffron. Amira laughed, but her expression grew serious. Hassan called from Baghdad last night. The situation at the old restaurant is worse than we thought. The family is considering selling. Before Sarah could respond, the service entrance burst open. Marcus rushed in, his usually impeccable appearance slightly disheveled. "We have a situation," he announced, his voice tense. The Paris delegation's flight was cancelled due to strikes. They were supposed to present the opening keynote. Sarah felt her stomach drop. The Parisian representatives, including the daughter of the restaurant owner who had once shown kindness to Sheikh Ahmad, were meant to be central to today's narrative about the transformative power of hospitality. "That's not all," Marcus continued. "The New York Times is sending a different reporter. Instead of the food critic we expected, they're sending Isabella Chen." The name sent a chill through the room. Isabella Chen was known for her scathing exposés on the restaurant industry, particularly focusing on what she called performative inclusion in fine dining. She had recently written a controversial piece suggesting that high-end restaurants' diversity initiatives were merely marketing strategies. "When it rains, it pours," Amira murmured, using one of the English idioms she'd recently learned. Sarah forced herself to take a deep breath, remembering all the challenges they'd already overcome. "Maybe this is an opportunity," she said slowly, an idea forming. "Instead of scrambling to replace the Paris speakers, what if we change the narrative?" She quickly outlined her plan to Marcus and Amira. Instead of opening with polished presentations from established restaurants, they could begin with real stories of transformation, starting with Hassan's video call from Baghdad, showing the real challenges and opportunities in making fine dining more inclusive. "We could rearrange the morning sessions into roundtable discussions," she continued, growing more excited. "Let Isabella Chen see authentic conversations about the struggles and successes. Show her this isn't about performance, it's about genuine change." Marcus looked skeptical but intrigued. The sheikh would need to approve any major changes to the program, and he's in morning prayers right now. "I'll take full responsibility," Sarah said firmly. "This is exactly what our training program is about, adapting to challenges while staying true to our values." The next hours passed in a blur of activity. Sarah coordinated with the tech team to set up a stable video connection with Baghdad, while Amira and Sophia revolutionized the menu to better tell the story of their culinary collaboration. Other staff members caught Sarah's enthusiasm, each contributing ideas to transform the symposium from a formal conference into something more authentic. When Sheikh Ahmad arrived, dressed in his finest traditional attire, he found the restaurant buzzing with purposeful energy. Sarah approached him immediately, ready to explain the changes, but he held up his hand with a smile. "Marcus has kept me informed," he said. "You know, when I first bought this restaurant, I hoped to find someone who could truly understand my vision for hospitality. I never expected to find an entire team who would take that vision and make it even better." His words gave Sarah a surge of confidence, but butterflies still fluttered in her stomach as she watched the first guests arrive. Restaurant owners from Hong Kong, Dubai, and Sao Paulo mingled with celebrated chefs and hospitality experts from around the world. Isabella Chen sat in a corner, her sharp eyes missing nothing. Hassan's face appeared on the large screen they'd set up, the early morning light in Baghdad casting shadows behind him. Sarah could see the familiar interior of his old restaurant, worn but dignified, like a beloved family member in need of care. As she prepared to welcome everyone and explain the program changes, Sarah caught sight of her reflection in one of the restaurant's mirrors. She hardly recognized the confident woman who looked back at her. The nervous young server, who had once judged people by their appearances, had been transformed, just as surely as Lumiere itself had evolved. The low murmur of conversation died down as she stepped to the front of the room. Taking another deep breath, Sarah smiled at the assembled global leaders in luxury dining. "Welcome to Lumiere," she began. "Today we're going to do something a little different. We're going to talk about the moments that changed us, the times when hospitality transcended luxury to become something truly transformative." The symposium's first day unfolded in ways no one could have predicted. As Hassan shared the story of his journey from Baghdad to New York, his words resonated deeply with the international audience. The owner of a prestigious Hong Kong restaurant revealed his own humble beginnings as a street food vendor. A Brazilian chef spoke about incorporating indigenous cooking techniques into fine dining, preserving cultural heritage through innovation. Isabella Chen remained in her corner, her laptop open, fingers flying across the keyboard. Sarah couldn't. Read her expression, but she noticed the journalist leaning forward during particularly passionate moments of discussion. During the lunch break, Amira and Sophia presented their collaborative menu. Each dish told a story of cultural fusion: traditional Iraqi dolma stuffed with French-inspired ingredients, classic coq au vin spiced with Middle Eastern baharat, delicate French pastries filled with date paste and rosewater cream. "This is more than fusion," Sophia explained to the assembled guests. "It's a conversation between cultures, between traditions. Each dish preserves the essence of its origins while embracing new possibilities." As the guests savored the food, Sarah circulated among the tables, facilitating discussions about implementing similar collaborations in other restaurants. She was deep in conversation with a Melbourne restaurateur when she noticed Isabella Chen approaching Sheikh Ahmad. The journalist's reputation for asking uncomfortable questions made Sarah nervous, but she forced herself to stay focused on her current discussion. The sheikh was more than capable of handling difficult conversations. Later, during the afternoon session, Hassan's video feed from Baghdad transformed into an impromptu workshop on long-distance mentorship programs. Restaurant owners began pledging support, offering to share resources and expertise with struggling establishments around the world. "What we're witnessing," Sarah heard Isabella Chen say to her recording device, "is either a remarkable example of spontaneous collaboration or the most elaborate PR exercise I've ever seen." The comment stung, but Sarah remembered Sheikh Ahmad's teachings about turning challenges into opportunities. She approached the journalist directly. "Ms. Chen, would you be interested in seeing something off the record?" Intrigued, Isabella followed Sarah to the kitchen, where they found Amira teaching a group of visiting chefs her grandmother's technique for hand-rolling couscous. The scene was completely unplanned, a natural moment of knowledge sharing that had emerged during a break. "This is what it's really about," Sarah said quietly. "These small moments of connection that happen when we create the right environment. No PR team could orchestrate this." Isabella watched in silence as Amira's students, who ran restaurants from Vancouver to Singapore, listened intently to her instructions, their hands covered in flour as they practiced the traditional technique. "You know," Isabella finally said. "I came here expecting to write about how diversity initiatives in fine dining are just window dressing, but this," she gestured to the scene before them, "this feels different." Sarah smiled. "Because it is different. We're not trying to change the face of fine dining. We're trying to change its heart." The afternoon sessions were interrupted by an unexpected announcement from Hassan in Baghdad. The family running his old restaurant had agreed to become the first participant in Lumiere's international mentorship program. The news was met with applause, but Sarah noticed tears in Amira's eyes. "They were our second family," Amira explained when Sarah hugged her. "To know they'll have support, that the restaurant will survive, it means everything." As the day drew to a close, Sheikh Ahmad gathered everyone for a final session. The energy in the room was electric, full of possibility and purpose. Restaurant owners who had arrived as competitors were now exchanging contact information and making plans for collaboration. Isabella Chen had moved from her corner to sit closer to the action, her expression thoughtful as she continued taking notes. Sarah caught fragments of what she was writing. Genuine transformation, systematic change, new paradigm in luxury, dining. Sheikh Ahmad stood to address the group, his presence commanding yet warm. "When I was young," he began, "I learned that true hospitality means seeing the dignity in every guest. Today I've seen that same principle extended to our entire industry. We are all guests at each other's tables, all students of each other's traditions." Sarah felt a profound sense of rightness as she looked around the room. The symposium hadn't gone according to plan. It had gone better than any plan could have anticipated. They had created something authentic, something that couldn't be captured in a PR statement or reduced to a marketing strategy. As the guests began to depart for their hotels, Isabella Chen approached Sarah one last time. "You've given me a lot to think about," the journalist said. "I came looking for a story about surface-level change in the industry. Instead, I found a story about human connection and genuine transformation. Though I have to ask, how did it all start?" Sarah glanced at Sheikh Ahmad, who was deep in conversation across the room. "It started with a mistake," she said honestly. "A mistake that turned into a lesson, that grew into an opportunity, that became a movement." Isabella nodded, closing her notebook. "Those are often the best stories." The second day of the symposium dawned with an energy that felt almost magical. Isabella Chen's preliminary article had gone live overnight, and her words had captured the essence of what was happening at Lumiere. In an industry often criticized for its exclusivity, a quiet revolution is taking place. At its heart is a simple yet powerful idea that true luxury lies not in keeping people out, but in bringing them together. Sarah arrived early to find Sheikh Ahmad already there, reading the article on his tablet. "Your mother called the restaurant this morning," he said, looking up with a smile. "She was quite moved by Ms. Chen's description of your journey." Before Sarah could respond, Amira burst through the kitchen doors, her face glowing with excitement. "You need to see this." She held up her phone, showing a video from Baghdad. Hassan was there, surrounded by his old restaurant staff, all beaming as they signed the official mentorship agreement. The family that had been struggling to keep the restaurant alive now had tears of joy in their eyes. "But that's not all," Amira continued. "Other restaurants in Baghdad are reaching out. They want to be part of the program too. Hassan says it's becoming a movement." The morning symposium sessions took on a new energy as news spread of the Baghdad initiative. Restaurant owners from across the globe began proposing similar programs in their own cities. A chef from Cape Town offered to mentor struggling townships' restaurants. A Tokyo restaurateur suggested creating an exchange program for young chefs from underprivileged backgrounds. Sarah watched it all unfold with a sense of wonder. She caught sight of her reflection in one of Lumiere's mirrors and remembered that first night, when she had judged Sheikh Ahmad by his casual clothes. How far they had all come since then. The afternoon brought an unexpected visitor, the elderly schoolteacher, whose birthday they had celebrated weeks ago. She had read Isabella's article and came to share how her experience at Lumiere had inspired her to start a cooking club at her school, bringing together students from different cultural backgrounds. Food has a way of breaking down barriers, she told the assembled symposium guests. When children cook together, they forget their differences. They just see fellow creators, fellow adventurers. Her words sparked a new round of discussions about education and outreach programs. Sarah noticed Isabella Chen furiously taking notes, her initial skepticism completely transformed into genuine enthusiasm. As the day progressed, Sophia and Amira unveiled their most ambitious fusion dishes yet. Each plate told a story of cultural collaboration, but it was more than just a combination of flavors. It was a demonstration of how traditions could enhance rather than diminish each other. This is what happens, Sophia explained to the gathered crowd, when we stop seeing differences as obstacles and start seeing them as opportunities. The highlight of the afternoon came when Hassan made another video appearance, this time with a surprise guest, the elderly Parisian restaurateur who had once shown kindness to Sheikh Ahmad. Though she couldn't attend in person, she had traveled to Baghdad to support the mentorship program's launch. "Hospitality knows no borders," she declared in French, her words translated for the international audience. "What matters is not the price of the china or the reputation of the chef. What matters is the spirit in which we welcome others to our table." Sheikh Ahmad, watching the video feed, was visibly moved. Sarah saw him discreetly wipe away a tear as the Parisian woman described how proud she was to see her simple act of kindness had sparked such far-reaching change. As the day drew to a close, Sarah found herself in a quiet corner with Amira and Marcus, watching the sunset paint the Manhattan skyline in shades of gold. "Sometimes I wonder," Amira mused, "what would have happened if Hassan hadn't recognized the sheikh that night?" Marcus smiled. "I have a feeling things would have worked out anyway. When people are meant to learn from each other, the universe has a way of making it happen." Sarah thought about all the seemingly random events that had led to this moment. Her initial mistake, Hassan's recognition, Amira's arrival, Isabella's skepticism turned advocacy. Each challenge had become a stepping stone to something greater. The evening's final event was an intimate dinner where symposium participants could practice everything they had learned. The usual hierarchy of fine dining was softly set aside, as guests and servers shared stories between courses, and chefs emerged from the kitchen to explain the personal meanings behind their dishes. Isabella Chen, who had remained to experience this final dinner, pulled Sarah aside. "You know what strikes me most?" she said, gesturing to the warm scene before them. "Everyone here is simultaneously teaching and learning. It's beautiful to watch." As Sarah looked around the restaurant, she saw countless small moments of connection. A Japanese sushi master learning African spice combinations from a Senegalese chef, a Brazilian restaurateur teaching a Russian colleague the secret to the perfect feijoada, Sophia and Amira collaborating on a new dessert that combined their culinary heritage in ways neither had imagined possible. The Sheikh's vision had evolved into something far beyond what any of them had initially imagined. Lumiere had become not just a restaurant, but a catalyst for change in an industry often resistant to it. The final day of the symposium began, with an atmosphere of anticipation. What had started as a gathering to discuss inclusive luxury dining had transformed into something far more significant, the birth of a global movement. Sarah arrived to find the restaurant already buzzing with activity, as participants gathered in small groups, eagerly sharing last-minute ideas and contact information. Amira was in the kitchen early, preparing a special breakfast that celebrated the connections formed over the past 2 days. Each dish represented a collaboration born during the symposium. French croissants filled with Japanese matcha cream, American pancakes topped with Middle Eastern date syrup, Brazilian pão de queijo served with Indian chutneys. "We've received calls from 16 different countries this morning," Marcus announced during the staff briefing. "Everyone wants to know how they can be part of this movement." Sheikh Ahmad, dressed in his traditional garments, stood to address the team. "What we have created here goes beyond hospitality training or fusion cuisine. We have shown that luxury can be both exclusive and inclusive, not by lowering our standards, but by raising our understanding of what truly matters." The morning sessions focused on concrete plans for implementing the changes discussed over the past 2 days. Restaurant owners and chefs formed working groups, developing strategies for mentorship programs, cultural exchange initiatives, and community outreach efforts. Sarah led a workshop on adapting Lumiere's training program for different cultural contexts. As she spoke, she noticed Isabella Chen in the audience, nodding appreciatively. The journalist's latest article had already gone viral, describing the symposium as a watershed moment in the evolution of fine dining. During a break, Hassan called from Baghdad with exciting news. The mentorship program had already attracted support from unexpected quarters. Local business leaders, inspired by the initiative, had created a fund to help traditional restaurants modernize while preserving their cultural heritage. "This is just the beginning," Hassan said, his voice filled with emotion. "People are starting to understand that preserving tradition doesn't mean staying static. It means finding new ways to share our stories." Amira, watching her brother on the video screen, squeezed Sarah's hand. Who would have thought that one awkward night could lead to all this? The afternoon brought a surprise visitor, the Silicon Valley CEO who had once demanded preferential treatment. He had read about the symposium and came to share how his experience at Lumiere had changed his perspective on leadership and service. "I realized," he told the assembled guests, "that true power isn't in making others feel small, but in lifting them up. I've completely restructured how we handle hospitality in my company's global offices." As the final sessions drew to a close, Sheikh Ahmad gathered everyone for a special announcement. The success of the symposium had inspired him to establish a foundation dedicated to promoting inclusive excellence in hospitality worldwide. The foundation would provide resources, training, and support to restaurants and hospitality businesses committed to breaking down cultural barriers while maintaining the highest standards of service. "And," he added with a warm smile, "I would like Sarah Mitchell to serve as the Foundation's first Director of Training and Development." Sarah felt her heart skip a beat as applause filled the room. She looked around at the faces that had become so dear to her. Amira's proud grin, Marcus's knowing nod, Isabella's appreciative smile. On the video screen, Hassan beamed with approval. The day concluded with a celebration that embodied everything they had worked toward. The formal barriers between servers, chefs, and guests dissolved as everyone shared in the joy of what they had created together. Stories were exchanged, promises made, and plans laid for future collaborations. In a quiet moment, Sarah found herself standing with Sheikh Ahmad near the window, where she had first greeted him so dismissively. "I've been thinking," she said, "about what you told me that night about your grandmother's palace in Dubai." "Ah, yes," he smiled, "about how it wasn't the crystals that made it welcoming, but the warmth with which guests were received," Sarah finished. "I understand that now more deeply than I ever could have imagined." The sheikh nodded thoughtfully. "You know, when I bought this restaurant, I hoped to create a place that would honor my grandmother's teachings about hospitality. But what we've created here together has become something even more meaningful." As the sun set on the final day of the symposium, Sarah watched the diverse group of people who filled Lumiere's dining room. Each person there had arrived with their own story, their own perspective, their own traditions. Yet somehow, through the simple act of sharing food and stories, they had created something extraordinary together. The elegant chandelier light sparkled off the fine china, but Sarah knew now that the true luxury in the room had nothing to do with crystal or silver. It was in the warmth of real connections, the joy of shared understanding, and the promise of positive change rippling out into the world, one table at a time. 6 months after the symposium, Lumiere had become more than just a restaurant. It was a symbol of how the fine dining industry could evolve while maintaining its standards of excellence. Sarah stood in the newly renovated private dining room, now transformed into a training center, where hospitality professionals from around the world came to learn about inclusive luxury service. The walls were adorned with photographs from the symposium and articles about the changes it had inspired. Isabella Chen's piece held a central spot, its headline reading, "The Future of Fine Dining: How One Restaurant Changed an Industry." Next to it hung a collection of images showing the various restaurants that had joined their global initiative. Hassan's revitalized establishment in Baghdad, new partner restaurants in Cape Town, Tokyo, Sao Paulo, and dozens of other cities. The new group from Singapore arrives tomorrow, Amira reminded Sarah as she entered the room carrying a tray of experimental dishes. Her role had evolved too. She was now Lumiere's co-head chef alongside Sophia, their collaborative menu having earned the restaurant its third Michelin star. "I can hardly believe how far we've come," Sarah replied, sampling one of Amira's creations, a delicate pastry that married French technique with Middle Eastern flavors. "Remember when I thought luxury was about keeping people out?" Amira laughed. "And now you're teaching people how to welcome them in." She adjusted her chef's coat, which bore both Lumiere's logo and the emblem of the Sheikh's new foundation for inclusive hospitality. "Hassan called this morning, by the way. The Baghdad restaurant just received its first Michelin star." The news brought happy tears to both their eyes. Hassan had split his time between New York and Baghdad over the past months, implementing the mentorship program that had grown far beyond their initial expectations. His old restaurant had become a beacon of hope for traditional establishments, looking to modernize while preserving their cultural heritage. Sarah's phone buzzed with a message from Marcus. He was in Dubai, helping to set up the newest branch of their training program. The photo he sent showed a diverse group of hospitality professionals gathered in a grand dining room, all eager to learn about the Lumiere method. The afternoon brought a special visitor, the Silicon Valley CEO, who had once demanded preferential treatment. He had become one of their strongest advocates, implementing their training principles across his company's global offices and funding scholarships for underprivileged students interested in hospitality careers. "I had no idea when I walked in here that night that it would change my entire approach to business," he told Sarah as they toured the training center. "We've seen incredible improvements in employee satisfaction and client relationships since adopting these principles." Later that evening, during the regular dinner service, Sarah observed the seamless interaction between staff and guests. The rigid barriers that once defined fine dining had been replaced by genuine connections, while the impeccable service standards remained unchanged. If anything, they had improved, enhanced by the authentic warmth that now characterized every interaction. A young server, one of their new trainees, approached a table where an elderly couple sat beside a young family with somewhat unruly children. In the past, such a mix might have created tension in a fine dining establishment, but the server, drawing on her training, found ways to make both parties feel equally valued and comfortable. "You've created something extraordinary." "Here," Sheikh Ahmad's voice came from behind Sarah. He had just returned from a global tour of their partner restaurants, but more importantly, you've shown others how to create it for themselves. They watched together as Amira emerged from the kitchen to share the story behind a special dish with an engaged table of guests. The diners' faces lit up as she described how the recipe had evolved through collaboration between different culinary traditions. "You know what makes me proudest?" Sarah said, turning to the sheikh. "It's not the awards or the recognition. It's seeing people discover, as I did, that true luxury isn't about exclusivity. It's about creating moments of genuine connection." Sheikh Ahmad nodded, his eyes twinkling. "My grandmother would have loved this place," he said softly. "She always said that the greatest luxury is making others feel valued." As the evening progressed, Sarah received another video call from Hassan. Behind him, she could see the busy dining room of the Baghdad restaurant, where a new generation of servers was learning to blend traditional Middle Eastern hospitality with modern fine dining standards. "We're changing lives," Hassan said simply. "Not just in the restaurants, but in the communities around them. People are starting to see hospitality as a bridge between cultures, not just a service industry." Sarah ended her day in the same spot where she had once stood judging people by their appearances. The crystal chandeliers still sparkled overhead, but now they illuminated something far more precious than mere luxury. They shone down on a space where barriers were broken, connections were forged, and everyone was welcomed with equal warmth and respect. 1 year to the day after Sarah's fateful first encounter with Sheikh Ahmad, Lumière hosted a special celebration. The restaurant had been transformed for the evening, with tables arranged to encourage conversation and connection. The guest list included people from all walks of life, from world-renowned chefs to local community leaders, from regular patrons to aspiring hospitality students. The occasion was the official launch of the Global Hospitality Initiative, a comprehensive program that would expand their inclusive luxury approach to restaurants and hotels worldwide. But for Sarah, it was also a moment of personal reflection, a chance to appreciate how far they had all come. Her mother, Diana, sat at a central table, beaming with pride as she chatted with Isabella Chen, who had become a regular presence at Lumière's events. The journalist's series of articles about the restaurant's transformation had sparked a global conversation about inclusion in the luxury industry. "Your daughter," Isabella was saying to Diana, "has helped redefine what luxury means in the modern world. It's not just about expensive ingredients or perfect service anymore. It's about creating environments where genuine human connections can flourish." Amira and Sophia worked side by side in the kitchen, orchestrating a menu that told the story of their journey together. Each dish represented a milestone in Lumière's evolution, from the first fusion experiments to their latest innovations. The kitchen staff, once rigidly hierarchical, now operated as a collaborative team, with ideas flowing freely between experienced chefs and newcomers alike. Hassan appeared on the large screen installed in the dining room, broadcasting live from Baghdad. The restaurant behind him was packed, its own celebration mirroring the one in New York. "We're serving the same menu tonight," he announced proudly. "From New York to Baghdad, we're showing that food can bridge any distance, any difference." Sheikh Ahmad rose to address the gathered guests, his casual sweater and jeans a deliberate echo of that first night. "A year ago," he began, "a young server taught me something important about my own vision for hospitality." He smiled warmly at Sarah. "She showed me that sometimes our greatest mistakes can lead to our most meaningful successes." Sarah felt tears welling up as the sheikh continued. "We often talk about luxury as something exclusive, something that separates people. But true luxury, the kind that touches the soul, is about bringing people together. It's about creating moments of genuine connection that transcend social barriers and cultural differences." As if to demonstrate his point, the evening unfolded with an organic warmth that no amount of formal training could have manufactured. Guests moved between tables, sharing stories and experiences. The traditional boundaries between servers and guests, chefs and diners, melted away into natural, respectful interactions. A group of hospitality students, sponsored by the Sheikh's Foundation, listened intently as Amira and Sophia shared their journey of cultural collaboration. The Silicon Valley CEO, now a regular patron, engaged in animated conversation with a young immigrant dishwasher about his dreams of opening his own restaurant. Marcus, who had recently been promoted to Global Training Director, gathered the staff for a group photo. As Sarah looked at the assembled faces, some she'd known from her first day, others who had joined along the way, she felt overwhelmed by the sense of family they had created. "You know what's remarkable?" Isabella said, joining Sarah at her quiet observation point. "A year ago, I would have called this kind of transformation impossible. Now I'm seeing it happen in restaurants around the world." Sarah smiled, watching a new server gracefully handle a challenging situation with the kind of genuine warmth that no amount of traditional training could teach. "We're not just changing an industry," she replied. "We're changing how people see each other." As the evening drew to a close, Sheikh Ahmad called everyone's attention one final time. "In my grandmother's palace," he said, his voice rich with emotion, "there was an inscription above the main door. It read, 'Enter as strangers, leave as family.' Tonight I see her wisdom in action." He gestured to the diverse crowd before him, the mix of cultures, backgrounds, and experiences that had come together in this space. "This is the future of hospitality, not just at Lumière, but everywhere that people gather to share food and stories." Sarah looked around the restaurant one last time that evening. The crystal chandeliers still sparkled overhead, but now they illuminated something far more precious than fine china and expensive wine. They shone down on genuine smiles, warm embraces, and real connections. As she prepared to leave, Sarah passed the spot where she had once stood, judging people by their appearances. The mirror still hung there, but now it reflected a different person, someone who had learned that the greatest luxury of all was the ability to see the dignity in every person who walked through their doors. Outside, the Manhattan skyline glittered against the night sky, a reminder of how far they had come and how far they could still go. The light from Lumiere's windows spilled onto the sidewalk, welcoming and warm, a beacon of change in an industry that had once defined itself by exclusivity. The lessons learned within these walls had rippled out into the world, touching lives and transforming perspectives far beyond what any of them had imagined possible. And it had all started with a mistake, a moment of judgment that had opened the door to understanding. In the end, Lumiere had become more than a restaurant. It had become a testament to the power of genuine hospitality to bridge divides and bring people together. And for Sarah, that was the greatest luxury of all.